All right, while everybody's joining here, would love in the chat if you want to share where you're joining us from. I'm joining everybody from just north of Boston on the New Hampshire seacoast. Yeah, so always fun to see where everybody's joining from. Chat if you want to share where you're joining us from. All right, awesome. Oh, super cool. Oh, nice. In Brazil. Oh, it's probably weather's probably a little bit nicer there than it is in New England at the moment. Awesome. Philly. Cool. All righty, great. Perfect. Well, we will just get going here. So I know I want to be mindful of everybody's time as they're joining us. So thanks everybody for being with us today. I'm going to quickly here just share my screen so we can get started. Just a brief presentation, and then we'll pop into your questions. I know lots of people submitted several questions before during registration, so I'll approach those first and kind of start answering those. And then from there, I'm happy to take any questions that you have in the Q&A section. So if you could enter your questions there, then that enables it so everybody can see it. So if you can do that, if you're on the Zoom webinar, if you're on YouTube, you can always send us your questions alternately. Alrighty, so just going to get that started for you. Okay. Here we go. I appreciate everybody joining us today. Hope you're all doing well. All righty. We'll do quick present there. Awesome. So as you all saw for today, our topic is kind of how to gain experience, either, obviously it's all virtual at the moment now. So making sure that, we can either gain that experience with, potentially an internship or projects or just different ways to kind of help, build that experience. Because I know that's kind of an often, a little bit of a juxtaposition or struggle that we find ourselves in during a job search. So just wanted to be kind of speak to that today. So that's just my background. I'm a career services manager with Springboard. I predominantly focus on our data and coding vertical, but have recruited and helped people in lots of different industries and worked in a lot of different industries myself in different roles. So I'm really excited to be chatting with you all today and share some of that experience. So kind of based off of our topic, I know this is usually what, when I'm working with people through Springboard and kind of, even when I was recruiting, a question I would get a lot is, so I'm doing all this interviewing and everybody's asking me like how much experience I have or, what experience do I have in this specific area, right? So why do they ask that? And then, how do I get some of that experience, right? Because you can't always maybe per se get the exact experience on the job that they're looking for, but there are ways to at least show that you've got the initiative to try and show that you know how to use those skills. So why do they ask? Essentially, it's for proof. Companies usually ask for work experience or projects because they want to see that you can apply those specific skills and that you've done them in like a relevant, like either project or piece of work. So it shows them that you can do it and that you've done it well, and it shows them kind of the result, right? So that's why I know we've talked in some of our other webinars as well about, networking or things like that. And, a big part of, sharing what you're working on is that it's relevant, right, to the companies or industries or types of jobs that you're trying to get into. And then like, secondly, it's, if somebody else has hired you to do something similar, it kind of is like proof of concept for them that like, how to do it. And that you have that kind of desirable like outcome that you have had from the deliverables that you've given in a particular role. So essentially just kind of all rolls up to having proof of that you know how to do it, whether it's through somebody having hired you to do it previously in another role, That's also where showing, being really good at showing and providing these, solid examples of your transferable skills is really important. But then also, that all valuable project experience, which is something that I know in like our Springboard courses, we obviously have students develop projects to use in their interviewing. But for any role or anything that you're doing, in your job searches out there, really important to show that you've tried to gain some experience, whether it's through projects or either a mentor or gaining some sort of experience through volunteering, different things like that. And that's kind of what we're going to go into next is, how do I get that experience? um, and so here I've got some examples, but then also some resources as well. And then I'm going to go into a quick um, demo really quick of just how to use the Google job board, because I think it's one thing that is sometimes an untapped resource for people. And it actually is super, super helpful, I found. So, how to get that experience when nobody will hire me without it, right? Which I know can be super frustrating. So just want to throw that out there. I completely understand that can be tough. When it comes to the internship, side of things. Right now, I know a lot of people's internships have been maybe canceled even, right? And that's definitely frustrating. You went through that whole process to get hired and things like that. So I would definitely reach back out and see if they'd be willing to offer some sort of virtual internship or experience, even if maybe they can't pay you for it. Maybe they could at least do something to help you help build your resume, especially if you're, a senior or junior in college, and you're trying to gain, help trying to build your resume up, right? Even if it's paid or unpaid, it's still valuable experience. So that can always be really helpful and never hurts to ask. You won't get it if you don't ask. They may say no, but it's still worth asking. And then in terms of just some other resources, like I said, I'll go over the Google job board once we kind of go through these. And then internships.com/virtual. That's just another site that I was able to find that had quite a few virtual opportunities at various levels. Another thing you can do in terms of, getting a project, say you aren't able to find, a company or a volunteer opportunity, but you still want to get a project done and work on something, right? You could always reach out to a friend, a classmate. There's also in terms of like communities for your specific discipline. I know, for example, a lot of people will go on to different forums and reach out and say, hey, I noticed that you posted this article or you shared this or asked this question, right? You can say, hey, would you be interested in working on this type of project? Just as, and then, you want to make sure you scope it out in terms of like, this is how long it would be. This is the skills I'd like to work on. Would you be interested in doing that? Another thing is you could pitch an idea to like a local company. So, say there's a small business in your area and, you're really good at social media and it's something that you can tell that they're really not very good at. And that maybe you could do that as like a pro bono kind of project for them to gain some experience and kind of learn how to work with a client and things like that. That's an example. I also have had some students reach out to, companies and say, hey, I noticed that, I did this project and it had to do with customer churn, and I could do that sort of project for you to help you kind of work with your data and figure that out. So you could do maybe like a small little project, different things like that, just to get the experience. Also, that person, if you do a good job, might be open to being a reference for you, which is also super valuable. In terms of like volunteer work in pro bono projects, these are just a few websites where you can find volunteer opportunities or pro bono things around your area. So these are just some really helpful websites that I know that people have been able to find some good resources at or good opportunities at. If you already volunteer somewhere, this is a great time also to reach out and see if they might be open for you to do a project for them. Now, granted, I think a lot of volunteer companies right now are pretty busy. So you'd want to make sure that it was something that either is helping solve or helping appease like a current issue that they might be having. So say that they're having an issue helping more people understand like what their hours are, right? So maybe you could help with something on their website, or an email campaign or something like that, or a text campaign. Different things kind of like that, that might be helpful. Also, there are freelance or like gig economy sites like Upwork or Fiverr, different things. There's also like 99 Designs, things like that. Those are usually more geared towards people with like technical skill sets. So if you are somebody like that, those can sometimes be like side hustle sites. They can, just as a caveat, those can be a lot of work because you do have to set up like a pretty comprehensive profile, and you do need to actually bid on work when people post that they need help on something, and it's pretty competitive, because there's just a lot of people on the sites. So it's something that you'd want to make sure you have time to put into, and I would just evaluate it and see if it is a good use of your time. And then in terms of like connecting with people in collaborative communities, kind of like I mentioned before, like working on a project with a friend or a classmate, these are just additional communities. Maybe if you don't have somebody like that to reach out to work on a project, these are just some example. These are predominantly technical. I think Quora and Slack are the most cross-functional in terms of like any industry has a Slack channel, or Quora also can speak to any industry or where people are asking questions. But these can also be great in terms of like reaching out to people and see if they'd be open to working on a project, or just getting project ideas, can be helpful in those places. So as I mentioned, I'm going to show the Google job board just how to find a kind of a remote internship there. So I'm going to make sure I do this correctly here. There we go. All right. I did it, and I hopefully didn't disconnect anyone. Alrighty. So just popping in here. So this is the Google job search kind of site here. So one thing that you would do is just in a regular Google search bar, even before you get to this page, you would just type in remote internship summer 2020. And then you'll usually see a blue bar kind of like this, and it'll list maybe 2 or 3 jobs in the search page. You'd click on any one of these and it'll take you to this page. The nice thing about this is you can, and you'll see here it says work from home. So that's also just kind of highlights that. And then these are just lots of different internships. The thing that you'll notice is that they're from all different job sites. They're from LinkedIn, they're from AngelList, they're from internships.com, the website I mentioned. So it pulls from all these different sites. Granted, internships.com seems to be a big winner in terms of where they're posted from. So in terms of that one that I mentioned, that could be super helpful. But there are a lot of different opportunities. So this is a great way also to find things outside of some of those maybe more popular or more common things. And then you'll also notice you can bookmark them, so they'll go into the saved. You can also save this specific search. Just save it here, and it'll also turn on email alerts. So you get an email alert anytime these pop up. You can also track your alerts, the saved, and then the jobs. And then here are the categories in terms of like when it was posted. So if you want to do, the past week, you could look at all the ones that were posted in the last week or the last like 3 days, as you maybe are more actively like applying. So you'll want to kind of check, or even in the past day, right? So you'll notice there's probably been like 5 or 6 posted in the past day, past 3 days, there's probably, 14 or so. So that's where you can kind of go in and start to narrow those down a little bit more. So that's just to show you those. But yeah, as I mentioned, for the Q&A, please make sure that you put your questions in there. And then if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at hello@springboard.com. We're happy to answer any of your questions there. But what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to stop sharing there. Hello, everybody. And I'm just going to pop in and start answering some of your all's questions that you'd all sent into us when you were registering. So wanted to just pop into those really quick. All right. I think this is a good question. So how to gain, so I think this question, hopefully the person that asked how to gain experience through project opportunities, that this helped answer some of your questions. So hopefully that was beneficial to you. Feel free to throw in an additional question if it didn't into the Q&A. And another one is, how to stand out when sending connections on LinkedIn. So, obviously, networking and those types of things, which we've done previous webinars on, are really important. I think one of the main things to stand out is that it's is kind of like how you're writing it, right? So there's a lot of different factors, but I would say that it's short and concise, and it's clear what you want to, like, why you're reaching out to them, what you want to talk to them about, and like when you would like to talk to them, or what that action item is. Because a lot of the times, I would say most people, the biggest mistakes they make when they're reaching out to people, whether it's hiring managers or recruiters, I would say the top 3 things they do wrong are: the message is way too long. They don't actually ask for anything. It's more of like a cliffhanger kind of message. And the third thing is they don't normally attach their resume or portfolio. So on the flip side of that, what you should do is have a concise, clear message. Make sure you're specific as to what you're asking for, or like trying to get out of the conversation, and then that you attach your profile or resume. So just make sure you're doing those 3 things, and I think that'll make you stand out. Also, no spelling errors. That makes you stand out in a bad way. So make sure that you're either throwing it in Google Docs and doing a quick spell check, or if you have Grammarly, different things like that can be helpful. Alrighty, so this is a good question in terms of just like best practices for scoping, planning, and tracking activities daily, weekly. So I think this is probably, something that's a little more difficult, especially if you're working from home and you don't have that normal separation, maybe from like work and then coming home and maybe like practicing or doing your job search. So really helpful to time blocking is an easy way, like without even having a tool, is to just block out specific amounts of time that you're going to put towards a particular task. So say, you have 2 hours at the end of every day to work on your job search or a project. So you'd want to block out those times in what you actually want to spend your time doing. So it could be that, Monday, Wednesday, Friday are when you spend that 2 hours on your project work, and you want to spend the first 30 minutes on research, and then, kind of how you would break it down in order to meet a deadline. So say you're doing a project with somebody. A lot of the times people will work backwards. So they know what the deadline is, and then they'll work backwards in order to make sure, as they break out the tasks, they'll work backwards towards like today. And then say you have a current deadline, you can work backwards and break down the tasks so that you meet the deadline, but you know what you need to do in order to get there. So there's a lot of different things like that. There are a lot of tools too that you can use in terms of planning. There's tools like Todoist. There's also like Evernote, things like that that people use in terms of like Chrome plugins or different tools. I know I've also had some students use some time management tools that just kind of help them with the time blocking. I've also had some students that have tools that literally like shut off everything else except the one window they have open on their laptop, which I think can sometimes be trouble, especially if you're expecting like a call or things like that. So I would say just making sure you're like careful when you're using those types of things. But those are just some different tools. But I would say the easiest thing is time blocking, and just making sure you're really aware of like what your each minute or each increment of time is associated and given like a task. Makes it a lot easier for you to track kind of what you need to get done and how to break that down. You can also break it down in terms of priorities of your tasks. Different things like that can always be important. Alrighty, so this is a good question. What would be a good selling point to find a virtual job? So I'm guessing the question has to do more with like, what is a good way for me to sell like myself in getting a virtual job? So, if you've never worked remotely or virtually before, I would say I think everybody is now. So that helps with that kind of rebuttal maybe that some people have. So the fact that you've had experience doing it, maybe sharing, some of the things you've learned through the process of transitioning to like virtual or remote work. So I think that's a lot of the times what people want to know, because there is a level of trust and, an honor code and things like that when you are working virtually. So the fact that other people have trusted you to do that and that you've done well in those environments and that you're a good communicator, things like that. That's often some of the skills that are usually important in terms of kind of saying that you're capable of taking on virtual work. Alrighty. So, which companies are more likely to hire for remote positions? So this is a funny one now, right? Because I think a lot of companies are having to work virtually and are maybe a little bit more open to it. I know one of the things I've thought about is kind of, the silver lining of some of this is that a lot of companies are going to be more open to this virtual work. I think than maybe they had been previously. So I think that can be a big part of it. Also, when it comes to companies being open to it, I think also, if it's a position that you're a really good fit for, but maybe you don't want to move for it, make a case for potentially, being a virtual role. It just kind of depends on the organization and the type of work they do. Now, granted, like, if you're a nurse or something, doing remote work, unless, you're doing telemedicine or something, might be a little trickier. But if it's a type of role that can be done virtually, I think a lot more companies are open to it now. I don't think that there's definitely companies or industries that are more geared for doing remote work. And so I would say a lot of those are like kind of service type industries. So if you're doing like customer service or customer success or IT support, a lot of those are virtual already. In terms of if you have a technical background or doing technical work, you may be doing a lot of, video conferencing or things like that. But most of the time, you're working on shared networks and you can do a lot of your work. If it's a job where you physically have to be present to like physically do the job, it can't be done virtually, obviously then those aren't going to be making that transition even with what's currently happening, I think. And then this person had a question, and I want to also make sure, it looks like we got a question from YouTube. So what does it take to change the career after 15 years of work experience? Is this really possible? So I think definitely I've worked with a lot of people that have worked in an industry for a pretty long time to make a career transition. I would say it depends upon the degree at which you're making a change. So say you've been a professor, a college professor for several years and you're ready to get out of academia, you're kind of done, and you were a math professor. I've worked with a lot of math professors that have, left academia to go work in like data science or data analytics, things like that. Or say you were in sales for 15 or so years, and you, actually were pretty sales driven, like pretty technically driven. I've worked with people that maybe had an engineering background, went into sales, did sales engineering, or things like that, and wanted to transition into like more data focused work or technical work. So it's just utilizing those transferable skills. But if you do have 15 years of work experience, if you're wanting to transition the type of job, just always make sure that you're leveraging your domain knowledge. So it's hard, it can be hard to make a change the whole 180, right? That's usually how I'll kind of explain it to people, is making a 180 change can be tricky. And that's changing job title, industry, domain, everything. That's just the full shebang you're changing. Whereas it can be a little bit, if it's more incremental, like 45, 90-degree changes at a time to make that full change. So sometimes what people do is they'll make kind of a 90% or, 90-degree change where they are changing their job title, but maintaining industry or domain, so that they always have something to leverage. They have the domain knowledge, they have the industry knowledge to leverage, but they're just applying that domain knowledge to a different type of role. And there's still those transferable skills. Whereas, that 180 change is completely different industry, completely different skill set. I would say not that it can't be done, but it's a little bit trickier. Whereas sometimes if you make somewhat of an incremental shift, that can sometimes be a little bit better. Because when you are career transitioning, you want to think about, what do I have that I have to leverage a little bit, that can help me in this role. And that a lot of the times can make it a little bit not easier. I would never say a career transition's easy, but I would say that it can make it a little bit more like manageable in terms of how you're branding and selling this transition to people. Because then you at least have that selling point in terms of the domain knowledge. Or it can be vice versa. If you're looking to change domains but want to stay in the same type of role, it's just leveraging that solid hardcore skill set that you have. And then so say you've been in finance and you want to get into healthcare. Every industry has to deal with money. So that's a transferable thing. So you're understanding, the finances of things, but then, say you, don't really know much about like the healthcare system. So it's make sure you get educated on the healthcare system and things like that, so that when you're interviewing, you can speak to it, but that you're really selling those hardcore transferable skills and the impact that you had in your previous industry and how you could bring that and translate it to what they need. So it's also being creative in terms of how you're spinning what you're able to do and translating it to their language, so that it sounds like, oh, that's what we need. You know how to do that? Or, hey, you did that for them. You could do that for us. That's great. Because that's essentially how you're selling it, which can be super helpful. Alrighty, I'm going to pop into some of the questions here. All right. So if you apply to a job and get a rejection, can you ask why? Or do you just say thank you? That's a great question. I would say one thing is that it's always okay to ask, why you got, make sure it's polite and, saying something like, hey, I respect your decision. I just wanted to follow up and see, why I was rejected, just so that I'm, more mindful of this moving forward. And so I just know what I could get better at, or what your ideal candidate is and has, so that I can become a better candidate. So just making sure that you're seeing it, you're asking not because you're like upset, but because you want to know how to get better, and like, what are you looking for? If I don't have it, what is it? So I think just making sure that it's, keep it super professional, and make it sort of seem more that you're trying to improve versus disagree with them or something like that. Also, if you are trying to see if you can change their mind or something like that, you can also say, hey, I completely respect your decision. I wanted to also share this project that I recently completed that I think would be, a good selling point in terms of, my skill set for this role. Thought I'd share this as well. Please let me know if this changes your mind. If not, would love any feedback that you have on how I can make myself a better candidate. So that's a couple different ways. I think it never hurts to ask. If you don't ask, you'll never know if you could get the answer or not. Some companies, it is against their policy, like HR policy, for them to give you that response. So I would probably say a lot of companies, probably 8 out of 10 or like 7 out of 10 sometimes, can't really say anything. But, I think the follow-up I mentioned in terms of like, maybe if you've got another project or, something that you could call out, you could always follow up then. But it never hurts to ask. But more often than not, sometimes it's an HR policy as to why they can't share it with you. So it's not you. It's not your fault. Alrighty. And then should you do internships if you have related previous work experience? I think, internships, it's really more so about that you're trying to maintain, like you're maintaining a skill set or building a skill set or gaining experience, right? So all three of those things are actually kind of helpful for internships. Now, one of the things that can be sometimes tricky with internships is that they are sometimes only set aside for currently enrolled college students, right? It'll be like, oh, you have to be a junior or senior in college, or you have to be enrolled in a master's program or a PhD program for us to take you on. So companies sometimes have those specific things. I would say more and more companies are actually starting to offer kind of open-ended internships in terms of like who's allowed to apply. Because I think that is hopefully the trend too. Because I think there's a lot of people out there just outside of just people currently in academia, that are making career transitions or things like that, or looking for these types of opportunities. So I think they can still be valuable. Now, granted, if you're in like a paid job and you're looking to make a transition and you're looking for internships, that may just not be feasible for you. Right? Like you can't go from making a certain amount of money to like half, maybe, potentially with an internship. Unless you can do that. That's, obviously up to you. But not everybody can swing that. So I think, if internships don't make sense, that's okay. That's where maybe doing a volunteer project on the side, if you can spare some kind of additional hours or can figure out a project on the side, that works within your time, that might be the best bet. But if you are able to do internships, or that makes the best sense for you, they can be super helpful. And they also, a lot of the times, some companies hire from their internship programs, right? And so that also could mean that it's a short-term loss for a long-term gain. So it really just kind of depends on that organization and how their internship programs work. Or say it's like a smaller company and they only have a couple interns. You could say like, hey, is there potential for this to turn into a long-term opportunity? Things like that. Hopefully that answered that question there. So I'm just going to pop into a couple more of your questions. And feel free to throw your questions in the Q&A, especially if, even if it wasn't about today's topic, that's okay. So if you just have kind of some career questions that are kind of on your mind, I can almost guarantee you that someone else has it. So don't be shy with the questions. Alrighty, so I'm just looking at these questions here. So this one is kind of specific. So how competitive are remote jobs right now? So that's a really good question. They are probably there's more competition than there was before. I think we can all kind of agree with that. But I do think that there are, a decent amount of people that maybe don't want to work remotely. Maybe they're not enjoying this whole quarantine thing. And they, not that I don't know, I guess I shouldn't say enjoy, but maybe they really just don't like do well in a virtual work environment, which is totally okay. It's not meant for everybody. But I think that in terms of people that are looking for remote opportunities, I think, especially people that maybe lost their job because their company or previous position wasn't virtual, like couldn't move to virtual. I think that could increase it a little bit. But to the point that, maybe there is a little bit more competition, I think just the important thing is that you're, making sure that you have, good, clear communication, that you're reaching out to these companies, you're networking with people at these companies, and that you're, aligning your, resume with maybe the type of work that they're doing. If you have done remote work before, make sure that you're noting that, so that they're aware that you're, capable of working in that kind of environment and that you enjoy it or you've done well in it. So those types of things can be helpful. But I would definitely say there's probably more people looking or open to remote than there had been before. But on the flip side of that, like I was saying, I think more companies are probably like, hey, we probably need to hire some people remotely. So there could be that we have a little bit of a curve in terms of companies that are just preparing themselves, right, to be able to have more of a remote workforce. Or how do we onboard and like bring people on virtually, where like they don't come into our office to get their laptop and things like that, right? Like all just those logistical things that like actually take some time and processes and kind of, figuring all of that stuff out. And a lot of these companies are already virtual, so it's not like, they're in the office to figure it out together. So there's just a little bit more holes that companies are having to jump through, I think, in some cases to figure these things out. So it's just, kind of, I think we'll start to see more remote opportunities come. But like I'd mentioned with the internships, if the company canceled it, I would say it doesn't hurt to ask and see like, hey, is there anything that I could do that pertains to the internship or projects you're going to have us work on that I could do from home? I understand you guys are probably really busy or like, under a lot, there's a lot of stress just in terms of, your organization dealing with the changes. But, I'd love to still gain the experience, or do anything I could to help. I would say not a lot of people are probably asking that. Some people are just going to kind of be like, oh, well, that stinks, right? My internship was canceled. But I think that, if you show the initiative and at least ask, right? It shows a lot of initiative on your part. And it could be that the companies maybe are open to it. Not a guarantee, but hey, you don't know if you don't ask. So I think that can be super important. Um, Yeah, so we can share out the websites. Also in the recording, you'll also be able to see them again as well. Not that typing things out manually is as helpful, but we will make sure that you've got access to it. I think somebody on my team is listening right now, so they'll make sure that we get that shared out. Um, so hopefully those will be helpful. Okay, so this question is kind of about a job search schedule. Okay, so um, okay, so this one's kind of specific to like Springboard stuff, but I can kind of answer it in terms of just anybody that's looking looking for a job and kind of how to approach that schedule. One of the things that we have students do is break it down in terms of, okay, let's get your kind of branding figured out, right? What are you looking for? What's your overarching, like, what are those things that you're looking for in terms of location and job titles and all that kind of stuff? Okay, then let's think about, what's your elevator pitch? How are you going to describe yourself? How are you going to kind of quickly start to think about how you're going to be pitching yourself to people as you're networking, right? And then we're going to flow that into, your LinkedIn profile. And the one thing that we want to make sure people do earlier than later is network. Really, really important that you are networking from day one, whether that's just sending LinkedIn connections or it's reaching out and doing informational calls. It's important to start building that foundation, because if you don't have a solid foundation, you're going to have a very weak job search. And so nobody would build a house on sand, right? I think that's the metaphor. So I want to make sure you got some solid stone concrete action with the networking. And the reason for that is because it helps with your communication skills vis-a-vis interviewing. So it all goes to a particular end. You can also gain intel when you're networking and talking with people about interview best practices or what companies do for interviewing, skill sets that are important. Hey, would you be willing to look at my resume? I'd love to get somebody's feedback. Different things like that can be super helpful. Also can help you find out about companies that are hiring that maybe you didn't know about. So really important there. I would say in terms of like when you start applying to jobs, with Springboard, we usually, if the students are within our curriculum, we're usually recommending after they've done their first project and resume review. So I can say that, if you're just out there and you're, like, hey, how would I organize my job search? I would say kind of like we had talked about in, I think, our virtual networking AMA, which was, hey, you know what, do the networking, figure out what skills you need to get. What are those things? Start developing those skills, talk with people in that industry. As you're building those skills and getting project experience, you want to make sure you're continually updating your resume and your LinkedIn to show that, right? So just making sure that all of that information is clear, because it's pretty hard to go into a role without having like a project or any experience to show for it, unless maybe your previous role or company or job was very similar to what you're searching for. But if you are a career transitioner or looking for something slightly different, it is helpful to at least have a project or some of that type of thing under your belt, so that you're also just prepared, especially if it's technical. Because if you've never done technical interviews, there is definitely a learning curve, and you want to make sure that you're studying for technical interviews. And doing those informational interviews can be helpful because other additional people can point you in the right direction in terms of what to study. Okay, here's a couple more questions. So I was offered a 12-month contract without benefits. What's your opinion on those types of jobs? So I think that's more so up to you if you're okay with it not having benefits. I think one of the things that, if it's a 12-month contract, if it's depends if it's W-2 or if it's 1099, like who's paying the taxes and stuff, that can also, be a differentiator there as well. Um, in terms of a 12-month contract, I would say that's a pretty long duration. I would say hopefully it's like you've signed like a 12-month contract and I'm sure there's still at will though. So, um, being mindful of that. If it's a 12-month contract and you think that to it's going to get you 12 months of experience to help you get the job you really want, then it is definitely worth it. I usually like if I'm working with a student and they get a 12-month contract and they're able to, unless the benefits thing is like a huge, like a life issue for them, like, it's definitely a major issue. I'd say for most people that I've probably chatted with, it's usually not as big of an issue. They've been able to find things outside of it, or it's not a huge concern. And I would say if that's the case, 12-month contract is a great opportunity. And then if you know it's 12 months, so at month 9 or 10, you start looking for your next job. You've got 9 to 10 months of work experience under your belt and you're a whole new candidate, right? So I think it can definitely change how much you ask for in your next job because you've got a lot more experience. It's, like I said at the beginning of this, proof of concept, right? Somebody's hired you to do the job and you've done it. And so that's extremely valuable. That's worth its weight in gold. So I would say if it's a good opportunity, if you think you're going to learn a lot, and it's going to help you build the skill set that you're working towards, and that it's only going to help build your resume, I would say it sounds like worth it. But it looks like you're, in the Springboard course. So I'd say definitely talk to your career coach and have a call with them. Go through the offer, and they'll make sure kind of ease any of your concerns. We want to make sure it's a good fit for you. But it sounds like a great opportunity. 12-month contracts are great. I know I speak with a lot of people, and they're usually only like 3 to 6 months. So 12-month is awesome. Congrats on that. Alrighty, cool. So I'm going to just pop back in here with some of the questions you guys had said beforehand. So I think one of the kind of questions that I kind of continually get, and I know that we talked about with some different news outlets that had reached out to us recently, just asking about kind of the job market and what we're recommending to students and to job seekers. In terms of how the job market's going, I know we talked about like remote opportunities. So one of the things during this period is you don't want to just sit and wait, right? Because there's so many things that you can be doing, whether it's building skills or your network for when you maybe want to restart your job search, or if you are in the middle of your job search right now, what are the things that you can do to be active and to make sure that you're starting to kind of chip away and doing something different than the rest of the people out there, right? So I think doing effective networking and outreach, most people don't do. So if you're doing that, and just by showing that you're here today listening, is also a great sign that you're looking to, how do I differentiate myself? How do I do something different, right? So you're already on the right track. So I think a big thing is making sure that you're reaching out to people, but also make sure that it's intentional and that you're, putting your best foot forward, right? Because there's so many people reaching out now, you want to make sure you stand out in a good way. So like I said before with messaging, you don't want to send them these long monologue, paragraph after paragraph messages that they won't read. They'll go next, is basically what they're going to do. So you want to make sure that you're sending a brief paragraph, no more than like 6 sentences or so. It's clear. They know what you're asking for. They know what you're looking for. And they know why you're reaching out to them, right? And that you've either attached your portfolio or your resume or something to give them a little context, or even your LinkedIn link to your profile. Throw that under your name when you sign the email or the note. Really important to make sure that you're just keeping it relevant and concise. And that by doing that, you're showing that you're a good communicator, you're articulate, and you have a good attention to detail. Those are three very important skills. And so just by doing some of those things can be super advantageous. Also, just, with your resume, if you are attaching your resume, make sure it doesn't look like you've shoved everything onto one page and it's such a tiny font you can't read it. I know a thing right now that's really common is doing lots of columns and like funky stuff. I would say keep it simple unless you are a designer and like you're creating your own resume templates and that shows like part of your skill set. You don't need to be doing like crazy funky email resume templates, unless that shows a skill like from your job that you're looking to get into. So just kind of in terms of the attachments, that can be beneficial. And then, all right, so when it comes to, so somebody is looking, how do you generate work opportunities online? They're this person is a trainer. I'm guessing like maybe like workout training. So I know just some different things that I've seen people do is like posting some of their workouts, like short snippets of them on Instagram and like different outlets. And then setting up their own like paid like YouTube channel or things like that where like people can subscribe and watch like some of the videos or like workout routines or things like that, or also offering like meal plans or nutrition advice if you have that kind of background too. Just because it's a way for you to, you can do it over the phone or you can do it over like a video conferencing, and it's a way for you to still provide like a service and value. And I think a lot of people are at home right now like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to cook, or I don't know really how to eat. I just, I went to Sweet Green and the juice place all the time and that's how I ate healthy. And now, maybe I don't have the funds to eat at those places, or, I don't know how to make them on my own at home. And I can't get takeout as often, as I previously used to. So I'd say different things like that, just starting to adapt, and reaching out to, previous clients, asking for referrals, maybe ask for people to do testimonials of your training and things like that on like their Instagram stories or Facebook or stuff like that. And sometimes maybe that can generate some clients. And I would say that would be the same for, anybody that's maybe in, where you're like your own business, right? And you're trying to do like consulting or in-house kind of stuff like that. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Okay, so if you do a volunteer freelance project that doesn't finish, should you finish it on your own to show in your portfolio, or should you just show what was done during the project? I would say I would definitely finish it. And then in terms of, if somebody asks like, hey, how did this project work? Maybe show them, like explain to them a little bit about the, experience you had, and that the client like didn't maybe finish, couldn't, continue with the project or things like that, but that you, wanted to bring it to fruition. Or say the volunteer project, didn't have enough traction with the company, or there wasn't enough buy-in, so you weren't able to like continue getting support to do it, but that you wanted to take the initiative to just finish it. So I think that shows a really good quality on your part, instead of just having a bunch of things unfinished, right? So I think that can still help with showing your skill set, and that you're, somebody that likes to complete things. So that's always a good skill too. Great question. Do employers like perfectionists? Well, I think it's a double-edged sword, right? So perfectionism, to the extent that you have a good attention to detail, but not so much of a perfectionist that it keeps you from just getting work done. If you're like obsessive about being a perfectionist, it can make people miss deadlines. It can also make you spend way too much time on something that you shouldn't have spent that much time on, and then you neglected other duties. It also can make it to where you maybe don't work well with other people on projects, and that you're maybe not open to other ideas because you think you do it the best. And that if it's not perfect, you don't want to do it at all. I would say those are negatives. So being a perfectionist, I would just rephrase it, in terms of that, you have a strong attention to detail, and that you hold yourself accountable to a high quality of work. So I would just rephrase it. Yeah, so I think you kind of answered that. Hopefully that answered your question. So yeah, I wouldn't use the word perfectionist, but you could say, strong attention to detail, and you hold a high accountability bar in terms of the quality of your work. Um, but that you always want to also like show that you're flexible, you're good with working with other people, because you don't always have time to do everything perfectly, right? I know that it's we all want to do our best work, but sometimes you have to just get it done to a point where it's good enough, in order to be able to move forward and do the next thing. But I think in an ideal world, we'd all be able to get it done. But I think if you ask some people, there's no such thing as perfect, right? Yeah, you almost it's um, you could be working on it forever and it wouldn't be perfect. But I think that also shows a lot of grit and hustle. When somebody's like, I want to work and get it done and get it done really well. But I realize that not everything's perfect. So when I do things, I always see how I could have done it better or how I can improve. That's a great attribute. That you don't always think that everything you did was perfect, right? So I think that that's also a great sign of, that you're very self-aware and that you know that you could always improve and learn. I think every employer wants to know that, you're not a know-it-all, right? And that you always see opportunities for growth and to learn. Alrighty, so I'm just going to pop into a couple other questions here. Um, So this is a great question. What are some of the biggest changes shifting to virtual now? Have certain skills become more important in presenting yourself and ability to adapt? Yeah, I think this is, I think overall this whole kind of, pandemic and it's affected the world, right? And I think we've all had to show that we're adaptable, and that we can thrive in different environments. Not that it's not challenging, but that we're able to kind of rise above the difficulty and figure it out and do our best to try and make it happen, right? So I think in terms of adaptability, resiliency, and flexibility is huge. So that, those are three qualities that I think everybody's getting to exhibit currently in the climate. So with that, I would say yes. But in terms of like particular tools, things like that, I know a lot of people in the teaching community maybe never really used a lot of the virtual conferencing systems. I know that some schools have been switching to different systems, so they've maybe learned one and then got moved on to another. So I think, not being, not letting yourself get easily frustrated, with the changes or with the different tools and just be willing to kind of sit down and figure it out. Maybe YouTube a quick, tutorial. I think anytime a new tool comes out, somebody's got, a YouTube tutorial on it. So you definitely using that resource. And then, particular tools, I think anything with like video conferencing, or online chat type systems like Slack or like Google Hangouts, GChat, stuff like that, can be super helpful. Zoom is another, online platform that a lot of people are using. There are a lot of, smaller kind of companies too that have different like web-based virtual communication platforms. So just kind of learning those types of things. I think a lot of just the virtual work tools are going to be, I think, the main things that you'll see in terms of changes. Um, and then, I think ideally, predominantly what you probably use mostly in your previous job. Some teams maybe had to switch to using more like project management tools, kind of like Asana or Microsoft Project or, different tools where you can like assign tasks to different people and you can work as a team and see how projects are getting done. Trello is another one. Um, and so there's a lot of different tools like that. So it could be that companies are utilizing those types of tools, just in terms of trying to make sure the teams can communicate, everybody knows what's going on, expectations are clear. But then also just the ability to communicate, right, with people is also, those types of tools are becoming more and more important. And I think just overall showing your ability to like learn them and willingness and hey, yeah, sometimes they break or don't work, or somebody's internet shuts them off, or I think that one lady looked like a potato her whole meeting, with the Zoom settings. So it's just being flexible and kind of just knowing that, hey, everybody's figuring it out, and just being kind of willing to be a team player in that process. Um, all right. So let's hop into, we got about 5 minutes here. So I'm going to try and get through some more of these questions. All righty. So this is a good question. So this person was asking, as a fresh graduate, why is it difficult to get an entry level job? Um, do I have to like go to some sort of like course or something to be able to get a job? I think some people, maybe if in their degree or their school maybe didn't have particular skill set in their program, maybe it was more theoretical. So they need something that helps them. It's more like applications of your skills oriented. That's a lot of the times in technical disciplines that can be the case. So that's why sometimes people will take like a course or a boot camp. But I think in terms of just getting an entry level job, I think a lot of the times, depending on how helpful your career services is at your college, I would say they sometimes can be beneficial in terms of connecting you with alumni. Also, they can look at your resume, different things like that. I would say also, if you have family friends or friends that work at different companies, I would say, get your resume together, write a nice email and reach out to people and say, hey, I'm graduating soon. I'm looking for my first opportunity. I'm open to, I graduated with this and I'm looking to help contribute these types of skills, but I'm really open. Would you be willing to chat with me, provide me with any feedback, or are there any opportunities at your company that you might consider me for? That's a great way. Just shoot out a bunch of those emails. You never know what'll come back. I think it shows a lot of confidence, and it shows a lot of initiative, and it shows that you can articulate well. You can write a good email, and you can actually ask for something, right? I think a big thing that I notice with a lot of new grads is that they're afraid to ask because they don't know what they're going to get back. You get people that say no. That's okay. That's the world, right? Like not everybody's going to send you, yes, I've got a job for you. And it may not be your dream job. That's okay. Everybody works. Your career journey may lead you to that dream job, right? It may not be the first job out of college, and that's okay. Doesn't make you a failure at all. It just means you're in the journey now, right? It's part of the process, and you're contributing to society, and you're moving forward, right? You're doing it. And so every experience helps you build on that, right? And so I think in terms of getting that entry level job, it's just hustling and trying to talk to people and getting applications out there and just asking, right? Like say, hey, I noticed your company was hiring for this. I'm not that level yet, but I am, just graduating, and I'd be really interested in being able to use these skills to contribute to your company. Is there anything, that you might have coming up that you think I could be a good fit for? I'd love to chat with somebody on your team. Um, if you're really good on social media, a lot of companies have Instagram pages for their company to like share the inner workings of like what it's like to be on their teams. Send them a direct message and say like, hey, you know what? I've loved looking at your company on like Instagram, and I think you guys have a great like culture. I'm graduating soon. I would love to maybe chat with somebody on your recruiting team. Another way to get to people. So just be creative, make sure you ask, and don't be afraid to ask, right? And don't be afraid of their responses, because they're only going to help you learn. They're only going to make you mature, in this process and learn. And it's going to be extremely valuable experience, just even going through that process to get the job, right? I can tell you, you learn a lot more about yourself in the process to get a job than you do sometimes even in it. So that can always be super valuable. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Alrighty, so we got a couple minutes here, so I'm going to do my last question. So this is an interesting question. So should we start looking or networking? Not to be a broken record, but you should do both. But networking is going to give you the best return on your time. So if you think about, okay, I've got $1, And, I could buy something for $1 right now, or I could invest it and get $5 back, in a few days. Networking is kind of the same thing. Job applications, you can apply for what you have, see it right in front of you right now, and maybe you'll get something back, right? With networking, you can reach out to a bunch of people, get a pretty good high percentage of people reach back out to you, and then those people could be conversation, potentially lead you to a role. You're actually like 70 to 80% more likely to get a job doing that than you are to just do the application. So if you think about that return, you want to get the $5, right? Instead of the dollar. So I would say that's kind of the main impetus behind doing that. And I've got one last question in here. Yeah, this person mentioned, don't be afraid to hear no. Yes. Oh, hearing no doesn't mean that you're just in a sea of rejection, right? Hearing no just means you're one step closer to the yes, right? And I think it's really important in a job search to focus on the positive and be action oriented and see, what do I have control over? What do I not have control over? I can't stress out about the things I don't have control over, because I'm going to lose my mind if I do. Focus on the things I can do, things I can change. And a lot of those things that you do have control over are how you present yourself. How well prepared are you? What are you doing to reach out to people and to follow up, right? Following up is also a big one. So with that, I know we're at time. So wishing everybody a healthy and safe week. And we'll look forward to seeing you all back here next week. Thanks again for your time, and appreciate y'all coming.